Hi, everybody. I'm Dan Wells. I write horror, fantasy, and science fiction, and I talk about games on the internet. And today we're going to talk about the Middenheim book for Warhammer Fantasy 4th Edition. Warhammer is fantastic fantasy, kind of low magic, grungy fantasy game, which I love and have been playing since 1st edition. Middenheim is one of the cities in there. Now, I've talked before, and I have a video about the Ubersreik city, and this comes from the starter set for the game. And one of the things that I loved so much about that starter set was the incredible detail that it put into the city of Ubersreik, making it a really interesting home base for a campaign or even just a place to visit. You can go there once, and there's an extensive collection of places to visit and people to talk to and story hooks to start off into. Or you could set an entire campaign there because there's so much information. Middenheim gets the same treatment, and that's phenomenal. It's really exciting and a really fun book to read. So Middenheim is one of the biggest cities in the Empire. The Empire, which is kind of the default setting for the Warhammer Fantasy RPG, is kind of like medieval Germany, kind of early Renaissance era, I guess you would describe it. It's got, knights in armor and castles and everything, but it also has like gunpowder and stuff like that. Middenheim is one of the cities in there, and it has a distinctly Norse kind of flavor to it. Still very Germanic, but more, Viking priests wearing wolf pelts and that sort of thing. Anyway, as you can see from the image behind me and from the cover of the book here, it's a very vertical city. And that's one of the things that makes it visually interesting, is this city was built on the top of a plateau in the kind of creation myth of the old world where this is set. There's, a bunch of different gods, and one of them is named Ulrich, and this is his place. And his brother Tal gave him this huge city called the Fauschlag, not a city, but the mountain. And it was this big, enormous rock. And he said, "This is yours. I'm not going to mess with it. I won't let any of the other gods mess with it. You can just live here." And Ulrich's like, "Sweet!" And he took his axe and he chopped off the top of it and turned it into a plateau. And then people showed up and started building a city on top of it. And getting up to it is very tricky. There's lots of causeways and bridges that lead up to it, but there's also a really interesting system of chair lifts where you can, pay a couple of shillings and sit in this little chair, and some dude with a crank and a pulley will lift you up hundreds of feet into the air, just dangling from nothing, and then you can get up into the city that way, almost like a tram at a ski lodge or something like that. Anyway, it's a really different city than a lot of fantasy cities, and I want to get into it. So let's take a look here at the big PDF and then get into this. So the way this is structured, let's take a look at this. There's a basic overview of the city. And this is interesting as well. They've got a large section of city rules. So not only do they tell you the history of Middenheim and kind of the basic layout of Middenheim, but then there's several pages. What is this? 11 pages of rules of what it's like to live there. What are you going to have to do in order to survive and to not get arrested and to get along with the locals and things like that, which is all really interesting. The visitor's guide is the bulk of the book. What this section does is it goes through neighborhood by neighborhood, explaining everything interesting that's in there. It is an absolutely exhaustive, extensive, incredibly detailed overview of an entire city. You want a pub? There's a pub. There's a gazillion pubs in here. Probably one in every single one of these areas. Then when it's done with that, It talks a little bit about what's outside of the city and gives a couple of stats of creatures and people, but really there's not much of that. Then there's a smaller section here about the Duchy of Middenheim, the kind of area surrounding the city itself. The Low Kings are the 4 criminal gangs that kind of run not the entire city, but portions of it. And then there's a big section of the cults. The Purple Hand, of course, is the primary antagonist in the Enemy Within campaign. And the third section of the Enemy Within is called Power Behind the Throne, and I've got a review of that coming up very soon, and that entire story takes place in Middenheim. And honestly, the way that book is written and presented, you can't run it well without getting this book. You could absolutely fake it if you wanted to, but in order to run Power Behind the Throne properly, you need this Middenheim book in advance. They're clearly designed to go together and complement each other. There's a couple extra kind of character creation options at the end, and then it talks about future events, like what sort of things will happen next if you were to continue the history. If you want to, come back to this, the book, like I said, takes place during the Power Behind the Throne era. That is the city that is presented to you is the one you will be using in that campaign. If you want to finish that campaign and come back, then there's a little chapter there about things that could be happening in the future. One of the more interesting, but maybe of limited use, is this Appendix 1 is Middenball. Now, if you have ever seen or played one of the Warhammer miniatures games, is called Blood Bowl, that is about this incredibly violent version of rugby, basically, where you are trying to, 2 teams get the ball down the court, score a touchdown sort of thing. Kind of rugby-ish, kind of American football-ish, but with a lot of combat in it. Middenball is the RPG version of that. Not every group is going to want or care about this. The groups that do have interest in it, they're going to love that. So there's all the rules for if your RPG characters want to play Middenball. Now let's jump through this. I always love the art, especially this 4th edition. They've put some incredible art into the game. So here, like I said, there's these huge causeways that lead up. And if you want to get into Middenheim, you're going to spend a lot of time just kind of hiking up this thing. And depending on when you arrive at the city, you might have to wait in a very long line. There's a huge festival that they have, and everyone comes from hundreds of miles around to participate in this festival and sell their stuff. And so there's big, long lines waiting to get into the city. So here's all this history and this enormous timeline. Much of the city was built by dwarves, and there's actually a huge population of dwarves that live in this city. Very small population of elves, but a ton of dwarves. And so the dwarves and the people in Middenheim are very good friends, and they've lived together for a long time. And so you can see a lot of this big stone construction in there. There's also some high culture. Here's a bard talking to, performing before the Graf Todbringer. They're the ones who rule the city right now. Here, I don't want to show you every single thing in here, but I do want to find, there's a couple things that I really want to point out because I think they are fascinating. So here's a little page on how to get there, blah, blah, blah. Here's a nice illustration of the chairlifts. If you want to get up to the top of this plateau, and someone's got like 1,000 feet of rope, and you just trust that it's not going to snap, you can take the chairlift to get up. Now, here we go. This is where it starts talking about the individual neighborhoods. And way towards the end, and this was confusing to me, there isn't actually a, because they've got these little maps here, right? This is the Altmarkt, which means old market. And they don't show you where any of these neighborhoods are until you get way to the end in the Low King section. So let me find the Low King section so I can show that off. The Low Kings. Here we go. Come on, show us the Low Kings. There you go. This is the only place that the full map of the city is displayed in the entire book, which is a ridiculous choice. Why is this map not on a big 2-page spread right at the beginning of that, visitor's guide section, chapter 2? That it should absolutely be right there. Now let's zoom in so you can see. So here's the Altmarkt that I talked about. And, don't do that. So, flipping back and forth between the visitor's guide section and this little map at the end, you can look at this and say, oh, okay, I know where the Altmarkt is, and I know where it is in comparison to everything else. And you can see the little causeways that come into the city. This particular map also shows, look, the Altmarkt is partially yellow and partially red, which means it's controlled by Edom Gouda and Bladen. And yes, there is a criminal underboss named Edom Gouda, often referred to as the Big Cheese. This is absolutely the kind of game that takes something like that and plays it straight, which is hilarious to me. Anyway, let's get back to this view. So once we're in here, flipping back and forth, you can tell which parts of the city these different things are in. But what the visitor's guide section does is break this down into detail. So here's the Altmarkt and an overview of the Altmarkt. What has it got? It has a market area. It has the Exena House, the Fleischer's Slaughterhouse, Gewürzwagen, which is the pickle wagon. So just lots of things that exist there in the market. Lots of stuff. And throughout, there are all of these little boxes that have this fish hook. And a fish hook seems like a weird choice because they're on top of a mountain. But what that is intended to convey to you is that this is a story hook. So the one thing this book does not have is adventure information. But, like it doesn't have a specific adventure. Like, here's a storyline you can play out in Middenheim. What it does have is all over the place, on every page, sometimes 2 to a page. Here are stories, ideas, story hooks that a game master can pick up. So this one is about the Horse and Groom, which is a stable where people coming from out of town can stop and they can stable their horses. And some of those, criminal underworld people tend to prey on those kinds of merchants. And so this little thing says, not so rich pickings, the Low Kings reckon that what they lose in terms of robbing wealthier merchants, they more than make up for in the money they extort from stall holders. Any characters who work as pickpockets or footpads too close to the Horse and Groom find themselves preyed upon in turn. So, I love these kinds of things because, first of all, that's showing us real-world, practical situations about how the different elements work together. Merchants come in from out of town. They need to stay in these stall holders, the stables. This particular stable charges them money and then pays protection money to, Edom Gouda and Bladen. And then people who are trying to run a pickpocket racket nearby will encounter those criminal guards, or if they try to steal from those merchant caravans, then they'll end up tangling with the underworld people because the stables have paid the protection money and they've got to save face. And so there's all this stuff. And one of the things I love about the book is that complicated web of interactions. And complicated maybe is the wrong word. Intricate is a better word. It is not difficult to get your head around it as a game master or as a player. And that's because you can pick and choose the stuff that you need. The obvious story hooks are pointed out like this, but the rest of it you can just kind of go through and say, oh, where are you? You're in the Alt Quartier, which is kind of and then you read about it and say, oh, well, it's kind of a slum area with narrow streets, and you need a place that you can stay. Okay, how about the Bretonian House Inn? And then you read about that, and then you're like, oh, okay. There's an information broker here named Alfric Anvilbreaker, also known as Half-Nose. And so then you have a story ready to go, and there's exciting stuff. You can read all about Half-Nose here. And so there's just a lot of interesting stuff. And it has this, in detail for every section of the city. And this is like, I don't know if it's a full 100 pages just on the visitor's guide, but it's a lot. And so it goes through all of these things, and it's really great. So let me show you a couple of the other things at the end, because there's no sense, just going endlessly through the Alt Quartier stuff, the visitor's guide stuff. So it starts on page 33 and goes to page 110, so not quite 100 pages, 80 pages, still really big. Let's take a look at the at Middenball. Okay, come on, Middenball. Yeah, that is a broken link. Yeah, it does not want to send us there. So we're just going to come down here, and I'm going to use the PDF thing. Where are you? Okay, so there's Middenball. Talks about the basic regulations of the game. Gives stats for typical Middenball players. Basic quick play rules. Shows a pitch. Shows different things that you can do. Gives sample teams. It has, all these different tables that you can rely on. This is something that you could use as fun background. You need to meet somebody, and the only place to meet them is in the audience of a Middenball game. And so while you're there, they're playing in the background. You could get more involved and have the characters, dealing with the players or the coaches or the managers of a team, trying to recruit new players, or maybe someone is doing some dirty tactics and they're cheating on the field and it's not getting called, so you got to deal with the refs. There's lots of adventure ideas where you could get pulled into the world of Middenball. You could actually play Middenball as characters, which, the way this is laid out, it is very similar to a combat sequence, and so it's not overly complicated to play the game. You could even build an entire campaign around Middenball. Have the players be on a team and stat out some NPCs for the rest of the team, and then have them traveling around the old world, going from city to city in the Empire, playing this game and dealing with the other teams and coaches. There's a lot of neat stuff that you could do. So there's advanced rules as well if you want to get much more complicated with this. So anyway, that's what the book has. It is really well done. It has a lot of great stuff in it. And like Ubersreik, what I like about it is how it makes the city very real and populated and accessible. This is the kind of place where you could settle down, get to know a lot of the NPCs. It's more than just, here's a city and here's what it's like. Like I showed you, just in that alt-marked, there's 7 or 8 different places that you can visit. Each one of them has named characters with personalities that you can interact with, and each one is just filled with story hooks. You could spend so much time here doing things. And obviously, there is the option of doing much larger stories. Here, let's show you that. So I want to look at... I'm going to show you... Middenheim and future events. And this is a spoiler warning because there's some stuff in here that talks about Power Behind the Throne. So don't look at Power Behind the Throne. Let's skip that page. Beep. Okay. One of the things that it suggests in this book, which I think is actually a really smart idea, is having the characters arrive here, having finished Death on the Reich, and then just hang out for a while. You know, spend a few weeks, get involved with the local scene, do stuff, take on some jobs, get to know people, and then start Power Behind the Throne. And we'll get into that when we talk about Power Behind the Throne. It doesn't have a really smooth transition from one section to the next, and so something like this can work. But more to the point that I wanted to make, is that there are a lot of big epic stories going on here, even aside from Power Behind the Throne. So, for example, there is this Lich thing that is here, and it gives a whole timeline of undead manifestations. And there's lots of different ways that you can incorporate the rise of this undead, warlord that is around and threatening Middenheim, and how you can play through that. And different ways to use it. Here's lots of information about it. And so there's a lot of neat stuff. Anyway, the Middenheim book is really good. It's really well done. I have been incredibly impressed with every supplement that they have put out for 4th edition of Warhammer Fantasy. They are hitting it out of the park with the art, with the usability of the books, with the completeness of the books. This is the kind of thing where you can... I feel like I'm saying the same thing over and over again. I just want to stress the fact that this is so much more than just a description of what is in a city. It is full of story, and it is full of flavor, and it can add a lot to your campaign. So, Middenheim, the City of the White Wolf. Excellent book. Thank you for watching this video, and I hope you pick it up. My name is Dan Wells, and I am also a professional game master and an author. You can read my books, or I can run a game for you, including Warhammer Fantasy if you like. Thanks for watching. I'm Dan Wells, and you are awesome.